to the Mama's Well podcast. We are back with Jason Johnson.
Mama's Well.
Yes, she is. If you missed the podcast earlier this week, make sure you go back and listen. It's great. But there was one question that I didn't get to ask Jason, and it's important to me because it's basically how has foster care impacted the way my relationship with God. And before I ask him that question, I wanted to share a little bit with you, Jason, about how it's impacted me. And I grew up in a super religious church. Like, I say religious because to me, religion it kind of has a little negative slant to me right now and in my life, and has for a while. But very, very religious, very, very black and white thinking. Many, many rules. I probably was wondering often if I was getting it right. I mean, when I say often, daily, and behavior was very much my measuring stick. I wanted to be good. And so I knew how to perform. I knew how to get people I knew what people wanted, right, and I knew how to respond. And it's also, that's very inauthentic, because I'm basically living my life based on what someone else thinks. Right. And that's kind of, how I saw God. Like I wanted to please, and I wanted to do it right. And I knew when I was doing it right, I thought I was loved. And when I was doing it wrong, the opposite was true. Right. And so, really what I think has shifted for me is understanding, and it came through an education and a continued education on trauma, on the brain, on our body, our central nervous system, how trauma is stored in our body, how we respond, how we think, how most of our behavior is coming from a subconscious place. I learned that the way I do relationships was established before I was 1 year old through attachment. That's big, how I do relationship, because that's pretty much the whole life. So I would assume it's relationship here too. And so all these things have had me questioning the way I saw God, the way he saw me. And I'm just wondering, and it almost like I had two buckets. Like I had this bucket of new understanding that looked like love, that looked like compassion, curiosity, acceptance. And I had this other bucket that looked like was called love and God, but it looks like shame, judgment, rules, legalism. And I've been trying to put these buckets together, right? And so that's a really messy explanation of where I'm at. The good news is I'm starting to get them all together. But I want to know about you.
The first thing that comes to mind when you ask that is how has my view of God and my understanding of his view of me and our relationship together changed? I find for me that if I'm unaware and I'm not really paying attention, then I very quickly fall into this belief that my value to him is rooted in my performance for him. That if I'm not doing something meaningful for him, then he's generally not interested in me. And when I began to become aware of that, I began to kind of trace that back to where does that come from and why, this need to feel like I have to prove myself all the time to people. I tend to be a fairly quiet person. Socially, I just prefer not to be around. I very rarely feel lonely when I'm alone. Like that's just, I feel more lonely when I'm in groups of people than I do when I'm actually alone. And so to kind of overcompensate for that, I have found the older I've gotten, that since I can't prove myself socially to people and relationally at times the way I want to, maybe I can just prove myself to them through what I produce and the things that I accomplish. And then they can go, oh man, like, look at what Jason's able to do, because Jason's not the kind of guy that when he walks into a social setting, they go, oh, Jason. So what's my, oh, Jason thing, right? Well, I need to perform and produce. So they go, whoa, Jason, right? And I've projected that on God. And what foster care has done, and it's been a gift to me that I don't know that I would have ever really gotten to this place on my own without it being confronted by it very experientially through the foster care journey, was this question of what does success look like for me? Again, outside of kind of a healthy understanding, success for me was rooted in my ability to perform and produce in such a way that people go, wow, look at what you did. That's awesome. And then we step into the foster care journey and we find we're not able to control a whole lot of it. And we are certainly not able to control a lot of the outcomes.
Yeah.
And I go, uh-oh, but no, you don't understand. My value and my sense of security is rooted in my ability to achieve certain outcomes that people go, wow, look at what you did, Jason. And foster care doesn't give me that opportunity. And so it really wrecked me with this understanding of what does success look like for me, and really having to just kind of fall on the mercy of God and say, God, when you look at me, what do you see? And do you see someone who I wasn't able to produce positive outcomes in this foster care situation? And I'm pretty sure you look at me and you think, well, that was a failure, Jason. And I have just felt over the years since we've been on this journey a very tangible, real presence of him in my inability to control outcomes, and yet his voice continuing to say, hey, good job. And I go, what are you talking about, good job? I didn't fix anything. Good job. And then a million times in my life have I read Hebrews chapter 11. And in classic church world, we even kind of put a cute name to it. We call it the Hall of Faith, right? Like that's our Sunday school.
I just heard you talking about this.
Yeah. And we go, this is the Hall of Faith. We're like, that's so cute. But Hebrews 11 is not cute at all, right? The first 2/3 or so is all about people who were faithful to God and saw really amazing things happen. The walls of Jericho fell, the Red Sea was split, and we go, wow, like that's the kind of life I want, the victorious life, where God says, do it, I do it, and the walls of Jericho fall, right? And everyone goes, wow, look at you, Jason. And I go, yeah, that's what I want. The last part of Hebrews 11 says, now there were some people who, by that same faith, were stoned to death, were sawed in two, were left destitute in graves and holes in the ground. And I go, whoa. It appears that some people by faith were successful, and some people by faith were failures. And then the end of Hebrews 11 wraps it all up and says, now all of them were commended for their faith. Those who saw the Red Sea split and the walls of Jericho fall, and those who were stoned to death and sawed in half and devoured by lions. All of them were faithful. And so I look at God now not as a God who is saying, Jason, I need you to perform for me, and I need you to always make sure you're able to make the walls of Jericho fall in every situation I put in front of you. And if you're incapable of doing that, then you're a failure to me.
Or you did something wrong.
Or you did something wrong. And I need you, it's almost as if he's been saying to me over the years, I need you to be free from the need to always split the Red Sea. You can't fix everything. And you don't need to try to prove to me that you're worthy of being loved because of what you're able to accomplish. That's hard because we are in the middle of, not even the middle, we're at the beginning of what will be a very long story with, she was a teenager when we met her. She's now in her early 20s. She was in foster care when we met her, and she's got a few little babies. And if you were to look at what her life looks like right now as a result of us being involved with it for the last 4 years, then you would grade us as some of the world's worst foster parents ever. And because we haven't, she's still struggling immensely.
Yeah.
And a lot has not been fixed. Most, in fact, has gotten worse. And I look at that and I go, I can choose to see this as we have failed in this. The walls of Jericho did not fall in her life. It feels like actually we're just being devoured by lions even more. And again, God looks at that and his perspective is not, you failed, you have failed me, I'm disappointed. It's no, you've been faithful. And so the big thing for me with God has been that his expectation on me is, success is not rooted in my ability to achieve a certain set of outcomes. Success is rooted in my willingness to be faithful. And sometimes that faithfulness is going to see the walls of Jericho fall. And sometimes that faithfulness is going to feel like you're being devoured by lions.
Yeah.
And at all times, God looks at that and says, well done. Yeah. I love you, and I'm pleased in you.
Yeah.
I'm pleased by you. You bring joy to me. Well done. You are so loved. Despite the outcomes have no bearing on my love for you, my approval of you, my affirming of you. And that's been a process that I've been working through with him.
Yeah.
I don't know that I don't know that I could say I've arrived. We've solved that problem. God and I have solved that problem.
Yeah.
But we're on that journey.
Yeah. That reminded me of this quote you have, and I marked it somewhere. Hold on. Yeah. The expectation isn't that your love will always pull people out of a broken place, but that it will at least be willing to walk with them in it and through it. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we are asked to do. Like, nobody wants to be fixed, Jason.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to be fixed. That's one of the things that Kyle and I have come to some blows on.
It's
like
the age-old marriage thing.
Yeah, don't fix me.
Don't fix
Be with me.
Right, exactly.
And it's so cool because he's like, all I have to do is be quiet. I'm like, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Just sit and listen to me.
But I've got some ideas. Nope.
No. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying is like, you go into this where like God's love is conditional if we perform,
right.
If we do it the way that that we think, and that's, do we really know exactly? I mean, one thing I realized, I visited Israel a couple of years ago, and it was like Jerusalem, Israel, all the Holy Land, and you're like, I had no idea how much culture really played a part on this writing. Like, I have no idea. I don't understand this culture. Mm-hmm. I don't understand this culture, and it's 2020, and this was, 2,000 years ago, or when, longer than that. I'm not a Bible person, but scholar, but I'm just saying, like, how can I possibly be certain? How can anyone be certain?
Yeah.
So,
and to that point,
experiential. We have to.
And God, again, if you're kind of a faith person and you read the Bible and you say, yeah, that's truth for me. I think of Christmas often, which is odd when I think of foster care, because what we celebrate at Christmas is essentially the story of God saying, I see you where you are, and I could stay where I am. Snap my fingers, and everything's fixed. But I'm going to choose a harder way. And the way that I'm going to choose to bring renewal is not by staying where I am, snapping my fingers, and fixing everything. I'm actually going to wrap myself up in your brokenness and step into your story and become a part of your story. And I'm going to be broken by your brokenness so that you don't have to be broken anymore. And that doesn't make sense. Like, why didn't you just snap your fingers and fix this whole thing? Why would you enter into it with the long game in mind and endure all the brokenness and the suffering that you did? So we're really, really good. I'll be a little, I'll strong arm it a little bit here for a moment on my fellow Jesus followers. We're really good at kind of raising our hands in worship to that, the idea that God would step into our story and walk with us. And rather than just fix everything. He would just be with us in our story. We're really good at raising our hands in worship to the idea that God would move towards us in our brokenness. And we're equally good at using those same hands to push the brokenness of other people away. Mm-hmm. And there's just a massive chasm in there that kind of reveals the fact that I don't know that we really understand what it is we're raising our hands in worship to, if we're so quick to use those same hands to push people away. And to even push our own brokenness away. Say, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. You know, the crazy thing, and here's another point of how I've grown to see God differently and how I've grown to understand the way that he sees me differently is, for so long, I wanted to hide the ugliest parts of who I was. And then it wasn't until this that I realized, wait a second, the irony in all of this is that the ugliest, most broken parts of who I am are what attracted him to me in the first place. Mm-hmm. Like he says, I see your brokenness, I see your darkness, I see your struggle, and that's what's drawing me to you, right? Mm-hmm. And then you read in the Gospels, in the Scripture, and there's this interesting dynamic that plays out where everywhere Jesus goes, the least likely, the most marginalized, the most pushed aside are the ones that are fighting and clawing their way to get to him and just touch him or be in his presence. Mm-hmm. And it's the religious people around him who are sitting back going, what's going on here, you know? And then the irony in that is we now have churches filled with religious people, and the ones in Scripture who were fighting and scratching and clawing their way, just trying to get as close to Jesus as they could, want nothing to do with
our churches,
what we do on Sundays.
Yeah.
And again, one of my favorite writers and thinkers has said, I'll paraphrase, if what Jesus was saying to people drew the least likely of characters to himself and repelled the most religious, arrogant ones, and yet what we're saying now are drawing the most religious and are repelling the least likely, then it begs the question, are we even saying the same things that Jesus said?
Yeah.
So I don't know how we got down that rabbit trail.
You know what?
But I think it kind of comes back on me where I've seen God. He says, no, the most broken, the ugliest parts of who you think you are, I am so attracted to those things.
Yeah.
I see them. I'm stepping into them. I'm going to wrap myself up in them. And you and we're going to write a new story together. And you go, wow, why would you choose to do it that way rather than just fix it immediately?
Yeah.
And it's because I love you, because that's what we would do for our own kids. Yeah. You know, my wife and I often say, you know, our kids are getting older, and we say, I mean, what? You know, let's play out worst case scenario that one of our kids could make a life decision on, you know, and like, how would we handle that? Well, man, we would love them to it.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that they could ever do that would warrant us to say, you are no longer our child that we love dearly.
Yeah, I said when the beginning of this pandemic happened and then you start seeing all these divisions and, you know, everybody said, Kyle, listen, I have this great idea. If every pastor, every priest, every preacher, every rabbi, across all, just the only thing they were allowed to speak of for 52 weeks was love. Mm-hmm. That's it. I don't want to hear anything else. It's how loving God, loving yourself, loving your neighbor. That's it.
That's it.
It would change everything. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're saying, you said something that we said in the first podcast is we don't want to look at the ugly parts of ourselves.
Right.
We're terrified to look at our inadequacies or our shadow parts of ourselves, whatever we want to call them. We're terrified to look at those, but unless we look at those, we don't want to look at them in other people either.
Right. Yeah.
They scare us. They remind us of these things that we've been trying really hard to keep hidden and protected and put away. But I think that's the key. I think that's the key. I think, you know, he said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Maybe he was just saying that that's just how it is, right. That you can You are able to love your neighbor when you love yourself.
Right.
When you get that I love all those pieces of you. I mean,
100%. If I don't believe that God can forgive me and love me through my worst, then how in the world can I be a foster parent
impossible.
and love kids and families and work towards their renewal in their worst? Like, I mean, so we've even told our, I keep saying teenager, she's 21 now, which is crazy. But when we met her, she was 17, and I've over and over and over again thought, her life is by no means fixed. And we don't know if whatever fixed is, if it'll ever get to that place. But what we do know is this, if I don't believe God can redeem me of my past, then how in the world can I believe that for her?
Right.
I can't. And so there's some work that I got to do in myself if I'm ever going to be able to offer her anything of value or hope or love or just the willingness to be with her. Like if I say, I don't believe that God loves me in that way, then it completely cuts off my capacity to truly love her and the way that she needs to be loved. So you're right. I mean, it starts with, what do we believe is true about who God is and who we are in him? And then how does that translate into how we love others? And sometimes love looks like we're willing to say the hard things to people and we're willing to be honest with them. And sometimes love looks like, hey, I got some ideas on how we can fix this, but right now I'm just going to sit with you and be quiet. And sometimes, and another, we can edit and cut out or whatever. I'm just rambling now, but on that performance issue, and I got to prove to God, it's this idea of don't ever stop. Like, at what point do you get to that place where you say, I think I've arrived. I think I've performed well enough where God now loves me, right? You never get there. It's a treadmill. It never stops.
Yeah.
It's a hamster wheel. And I've heard it said over and over and over again in my life, particularly as it pertains to working in ministry. And the sentiment is ministry is a marathon, not a sprint. And I get it. Like, be in it for the long game, pace yourself. But I've also watched people run marathons, including my dad, who the last marathon he crossed the finish line, he collapsed in the medic tent and almost died of a heart attack. And I'm going, yeah, that's probably not okay, right? Like, and that's when my mom says, and you're done running marathons. We're done with that midlife crisis thing, right? And you see these inspiring videos of people, and we just watched the Olympics, and you see these inspiring videos of people kind of crawling across the finish line, their lifeless limbs, they can barely move. And I go, man, that is so inspiring. But I don't think God's expectation of me is, I want the end of your life to look like that, where you're just barely making it. No. So I don't think ministry is a marathon. I also don't think it's a sprint. I think it's something in between. I think it's the rhythm that we see of Jesus is we're going to work really hard, and then, hey guys, I'm going to go away by myself for a little while, and I'm going to be with the Father, and I'm going to rest.
Yeah.
And then we're going to work real hard, and then we're going to rest real hard. And the resting is not unimportant or unproductive. It's just as important as the working. And,
That's right.
in the sports world now, we've got interval training and CrossFit, and, all these groups are like, no, we now recognize that resting your body is just as important as pushing your body. And so another aspect, and I'll end with this, has been understanding that God doesn't love me just when I'm, doing. He also loves me when I'm just being and resting.
He's more of a yogi guy, don't you think? Jesus.
A yogi guy?
Yoga guy.
Oh, yeah. The Jesus yoga. Wow. The pictures I have in my head now.
I don't see him doing the marathon or the sprint or the CrossFit. I think he's more yoga.
Yeah, as long as it's like hot yoga.
Hot
maybe.
yoga,
Like,
okay.
we're
hot
going to
yoga.
sweat a little
Manly
bit.
yoga.
Yeah,
It was very manly yoga.
But wait a second. Even when I'm just resting and taking care of myself, you even love me. And
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that's just as important of a place to be as, being on the front lines of hard ministry. And you
That's
go,
right.
God, I'm doing hard things for you clearly this pleases you.
Yeah.
I go, yeah, but not any more or less than when you're just being with me as well. I go, what? So that's another place that I'm learning to accept from him.
Being.
Yeah.
Which is what we teach. This is what we learn as parents, that our children need us to do for them. Be with them. Just be with them. That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
That was so good. I feel like we're old friends now. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. I hope that you were able to sit back with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and maybe have some headphones on if all kinds of stuff is going on in your house, and just soak that up. I hope that you're in a place of questioning. I want to always stay in a place of questioning. Like, gosh, to know, I'm not going to be certain of anything in this lifetime. And so questioning's good. Questioning your faith, questioning how God loves us, how he sees you. I mean, these are important questions. It's at the core of who we are. And so I hope that you're inspired, and I hope that you keep digging. Get out that journal and write, and we'll see you next week.
Mama's way.